Them was an entertaining mutant monster movie from 1954. The film is in black and white, although it is cool how they briefly incorporate some color into the main title. Now the film opens up, we're in New Mexico somewhere out in the desert, and we've got two police officers played by Drake and James Whitmore. They're driving through this desert and they find this lone kid just wandering around with her doll. She's kind of in this shocked state, so they bring her into the car and they go and do some investigating of this local house that's been thoroughly destroyed. But by who or what? The damage includes these weird clues like odd, scaly remnants and also evidence that sugar has been eaten. I wonder what could it be? Now I'll say this. Watching this film for the first time, in the first 30 minutes or so of the film, we don't really see anything specific of these mysterious monsters. And I really loved that initial suspense. You know, we see these scenes where these officers are just creeping around an abandoned store. They're finding these mysterious alien-looking footprints. And all the while you hear the desert winds just howling in the background. It's really great stuff initially. They find a badly damaged body that was killed in a really nasty way. But I mean, come on, it's the 1950s, so they're not going to show much graphic. And the coroner's description later tells that he could have been killed in any number of ways, including tons of formic acid in the body. So an investigation begins, and FBI agent Robert Graham arrives. He's played here by the massive James Arness. And wait a minute, I thought FBI agents always arrived in pairs. Well, whatever. He soon shows up and he meets with this cheerful old scientist, Dr. Medford. He's played by actor Edmund Gwenn of Miracle on 34th Street fame. You know, it's Kris Kringle here. And it was really cool. He has this Dr. Hammond vibe to him, you know, like the old guy from Jurassic Park, this soft-spoken English guy. And his daughter's with him, Patricia, played by the lovely Joan Weldon. She's a brilliant scientist as well, and as the film goes on, she contributes in her own way, figuring out how to deal with this creepy menace. So Dr. Medford, he figures out that back in the 1940s, there's been some sort of atomic testing that took place out in this area of New Mexico. So of course, we can start to figure out that this is likely some sort of mutant creature. So Dr. Medford meets with the little girl from the beginning of the film, and she's still sort of in that catatonic state. But he decides to give her a whiff of the smell of this formic acid. And then there's that memorable scream. So this investigation continues. It starts to build, and they leave the girl and they go and investigate the trailer site. And while they're looking around, we finally get our first look at the monsters. And okay, I'll be honest, they're a little cheesy, but all things considered, this isn't too bad of a monster effect for the 1950s. So they take this big one down by shooting it. So General O'Brien, who's played by Onslow Stevens, and this crew of characters, they head into helicopters to fly over the desert to look for some of these nests of these giant ant creatures. On the ground, they make the descent, and then the film starts to take on this aliens vibe to it as they descend into these corridors of the ants, and they're armed with flamethrowers. I mean, there's even a queen's chamber with eggs, these massive eggs, and they all get roasted. A lot like Aliens. You know, I wonder if James Cameron was a fan of this film. So soon there's this military council that takes place in Washington, D.C. with lots of guys sitting around smoking, and Dr. Medford shows this film about ants, part of which includes an example of an ant trapped in amber. You know, he's already got this Dr. Hammond vibe to him. I wonder if Spielberg was a fan of this film. Anyhow, we cut to a government agency that is studying mysterious reports, sort of a prototype of the X-Files. I wonder if Chris Carter was a fan. All right, I'll stop. And what was really cool about this scene is there's a very brief, uncredited cameo by Leonard Nimoy, of all people. He's this government official. He's a character who is ironically receiving a report of someone who has sighted UFOs. I love it. It's only a very brief scene in the film, but it's really cool. So we cut over to the characters. They're heading to Brownsville, Texas to meet with this character, Alan Crotty, who's played by, of all people, Fess Parker of Davy Crockett fame. Man, this film had so many great, interesting actors who appear in it only briefly. And anyhow, he gives his story and his slow southern style, talking about how he has seen some UFOs. So now we're kind of left wondering, well, wait a minute, I thought this was about ants that mutated due to atomic testing or something. Are these actually aliens? Well, I was a little confused, but whatever. They keep poor Fess Parker locked up, though, so he doesn't go sharing his story. And again, I have to confess, I was a little lost, but whatever. So the investigation continues as they get this report of a train car that was attacked. Somebody was killed. A lot of sugar was eaten, so likely it was ants. And they interview a bunch of witnesses, one of whom is this crazy old guy named Jensen, who's played by Olin Howland. He was the old guy from The Blob, the farmer who first found the blob when it landed. So it's kind of cool to see him here. He's locked up in an asylum, but he gives him a lead that there are ants that are living in the sewer tunnels under Los Angeles. And this eventually builds us up pretty much to the conclusion of the film. I won't say much more, but they gather a bunch of troops together. They're going to go heading into the Los Angeles sewer systems. Yeah, it's always cool to me because I remember these tunnels being used in films like He Walks at Night and other similar films. Those are always great because you never know what's lurking underground in those tunnels. So just some closing thoughts. This was a fun monster movie from the 1950s. I really enjoyed seeing actors like James Whitmore as a sergeant, James Arness as the FBI agent, Dr. Medford, played by Edmund Gwenn, and his daughter, played by Joan Weldon. They were great characters, and, the investigation's fun to follow. It becomes a little preachy because, of course, this is, the atomic age, and, oh no, what will these atomic tests mean? Are we going to have giant mutant ants in the New Mexico desert? Well, who knows? But it was a fun film, and I also loved seeing a lot of the cameos of people like, I call it cameo, but it's just a very brief role by people like Fess Parker and Leonard Nimoy. A lot of fun. I love these old monster movies, and this is probably one of the best of the bunch, and it's worth checking out.